Welcome to Internext Global On Demand. Please enjoy the session at your own pace.
All right, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this roundtable on planning under pressure for discrete manufacturers. Today, I'm happy to be joined by a couple of industry experts, industry leaders, to have a lively discussion about this topic. I suggest we first start with a roundtable introduction. So maybe Brian, could you introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my name is Brian Lewis. I am the Senior Director of Planning and Global Materials Management of the COE organization for HPE. So I support, planning, I support demand planning, deals planning, integrated business, process planning, materials management, and supply. So I've got responsibility for ensuring, all data systems and reporting are in place for people to do their jobs and be effective.
Great to have you, and thanks for joining us today, Brian.
Thank you.
Craig, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, Koen. Thanks for having me. My name is Freek Aartsen. Work for a consulting firm called ION. We help our clients to improve their forecasting and planning performance. Actually, in all the fields just mentioned by Brian, so ranging from demand planning, forecasting, SOP, materials management, the entire scope of supply chain planning. We do that from offices in different places: Switzerland, Germany, the US, and the Netherlands. I have more than 30 years of experience of working in the planning area, starting off with Philips and now running ION. Specialty in life science, electronics, and consumer products. Besides that, I hold a position as a professor at the university in Tilburg, where besides teaching, I do quite some research on human behavior in planning. So how do we interact with systems? Why do we do the things we do? And it's a pleasure to be here together with those experts in the field.
Thank you, Freek. And last but not least, Frank, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Koen. Hello, everyone. I'm Frank Meurissen, Managing Director at Accenture. I'm based out of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Within Accenture, I lead our global planning practice, which basically ranges in work from strategy and consulting up to platform implementations and also running services as such, including analytical services. 25 years with Accenture, in which I've worked mostly in the consumer goods space on overall supply chain transformation. So happy to be here today.
Thanks, Frank. Okay, let's start with the roundtable. And to get us started, I wanted to start with you, Brian. And let's take a step back and see what happened in the industrial space in the last years, right? So first of all, we obviously about COVID, and then the demand came back strongly after COVID, and subsequently companies got surprised by the semiconductor and part shortages that increased order backlog, and because of the part issues that companies were facing, and that turned companies into looking into key constraints in the supplier space and sometimes multiple tiers upstream. So Brian, the value proposition of planning and decision making is obvious, and it has been for years. Now, why have we not solved this before? And what would you do to solve this systematically going forward?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think COVID and this chip shortage situation that we had was a whole new level of depth of problems, right? Things, unprecedented things that we've never seen before. I think all companies, have a certain amount of risk management, that they're doing, to be able to handle, downtime situations and be able to pivot effectively. But I think, this took the problem to a much deeper level, right? So when you started looking at the things that you need from a flexibility standpoint, from a manufacturing flexibility, from a sourcing flexibility, we weren't equipped to handle a situation that was that deep. in having a system, and the data to enable you to make quick decisions and pivot. So, it was definitely a challenging, situation that, it had to deal with. I think companies like ourselves are taking a deeper look at how we can use, other tools to look deeper into the supply chain, right? Not only looking at our suppliers and their challenges, but the suppliers of our suppliers. And then how do we incorporate that into our planning processes so that we can be able to make the decisions to pivot more quickly.
Okay. And so, Brian, that makes a lot of sense, right? So from your perspective, I hear you say that, you're looking into tools and getting more visibility into the suppliers of your suppliers. How are you now addressing that, to systematically address that at the moment? What are the key initiatives that you're kicking off around that?
Well, I think, one of the things that we're doing is, we're have a data strategy in terms of the supply chain data that normalizes and gets our data in sync. So we've got data that's external and internal. From a planning perspective, we need to see it all, and we need to have that visibility. So we've got a part of a data strategy, and then we're also looking at our planning systems to be more sophisticated on being able to, take that data and be able to make better decisions, from an end-to-end perspective. So between the data and our planning systems, we are looking to be able to leverage that and be able to improve our ability to make decisions and feed that data into our planning systems.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, right? So what I hear you say is to tap into more data, even external data as well as internal data, in order to make better decisions end to end. Frank, as you are working with many leaders in the industry, what is your take on this? And why?
Yeah, so let me build a little bit on what Brian already called out. I think what we've seen is that, and this is in industrial, but also I think in some of the other industries, typically a large chunk of investments in planning always went into the outbound side of the supply chain. That's where we felt there was more bang for the buck. That's where we felt we could make the biggest impact. So a lot of the investment in the end went into that area. And the reality was that risk management often just existed on paper, right? And then, of course, we had a couple of, black swan events. We had, I think, some difficulties to manage supply volatility over the last couple of years. And what you see now happening is that the same type of focus on having the ability to really optimize on the inbound side, and to have a scenario modeling capability, to have the right data foundation, to make the right trade-offs. All of that is now starting to move into the inbound side as well. And I think what we see some of the best companies do is having then in the end the ability to really start thinking end to end. So creating synergies between the inbound and the outbound, and starting to actually look at your modeling capability to then optimize the overall outcome as such. And this is a bit, I think, some of the additional attention that was required on the inbound side to address some of the things that we saw happening in the last sort of 12 to 24 months.
Yeah, and I definitely recognize that, right? So I also recognize your observation that a lot of effort went to the outbound side, and it shifts now to the inbound and risk modeling side of things. And since I've been in the industry, right, so scenario planning has been around there, and it's always been something that has been discussed, but it's been kind of a luxury, and I think it's become a necessity by now, right? Freek, maybe from your perspective, right? So when you think about risk management and scenario planning, and that becoming a necessity, what is your observation around that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, because I think all of our clients talk about scenario planning, and also building a bit on the things that have been said by Brian and Frank in this respect. Having this information, having this end-to-end visibility, generates some new questions. Because I should have warned people, I studied economics. Because having this collaboration goes via 3 angles. One is then the information, what they call information alignment. And there we are building those pipelines, inbound, outbound. Everybody can see whatever he wants. And that's the first step. And to be really honest, that's the easiest step. And people might say now, oh my God, it's already difficult to get, for example, data aligned over my supply chain. But in my sense, it's easy. It becomes difficult when you look at the 2 different dimensions, which also contribute to this collaboration. It's called collaboration index. One is decision alignment or decision synchronization, because it's great that I have end-to-end visibility in my supply chain, but I have 1,000 components going into an HPE product. I need to start aligning the decisions over a different dimension before I can do a scenario. Because if I have one single component not available, I can still not make it. Like my hometown in the Netherlands is Eindhoven. A certain moment ago, there were the parking lot of DAF, which is the truck manufacturer, was fully packed with trucks where one really $2 component was not available, so they could not share. So we have to start thinking also about how am I going to synchronize those decision processes in those companies, which is already a bit more difficult than starting to harmonize information over the supply chain. But then the third dimension comes in, which is economics, is how are we going to, let's say, spread the incentives over the supply chain? It's all about economics, stupid. How are we going to make sure that people want to contribute? So the pie gets bigger. We are better able to respond. We are better able to do scenarios. But in the end, how do we make sure that not everybody in the end is let's say, optimizing its own P&L again in the supply chain, which is the third dimension. So we see on top of let's say, building this end-to-end visibility, if it's first tier, second tier, if it's inbound, outbound, the sort of questions we get are around, okay, how can I synchronize my planning process with my key suppliers? Or how can I have a different incentive sharing model with some of my key component suppliers, but not only my key component suppliers, also the suppliers of those key component suppliers. So I think scenario planning is really important. It's really getting there. And from an information perspective, I think we are already able to do kind of scenarios. But to put it into practice, we also need this let's say, what you call decision synchronization on the one hand, and this incentive alignment on the other hand. So it's going to create new work for us as professionals, because we are not here yet. At least that's my feeling, and also based on the sort of questions we get now from the industry. It's using the Maserati you just bought, which is 09 or whatever there, and putting it into practice.
That's an interesting perspective, right? And I agree, right? So having a scenario is one, but how do you actually go from that into operationalizing an actual change, right? That's exactly the $1 million question. Brian, I'm sure you're right in the middle of that. Any learnings or insights from your perspective on putting that in practice?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that we are focusing on in terms of trying to improve our ability to do those scenario plans, and what's needed is the flexibility, right, and the options in terms of what levers you can pull, in terms of your sourcing decisions, your manufacturing decisions, and one of the key things is understanding on your scenarios is what scenarios do you leverage, right? Like, so what are your insights, and what are the different things that you need to be modeling and testing to be able to come with making the best decisions. So having that information available, and doing that is somewhat of a cumbersome process, and something that we're looking to improve in the future state with some of the next generation tools.
How do you get a better grip on your demand as part of your journey around next gen technology, Brian?
Yeah, I think, for our business, we're highly deal driven. Forecast accuracy in a configure to order business can be a challenge. It was definitely a challenge these past few years, with COVID and the chip shortages and et cetera, right? So, in 20 years, frankly, I guess I'm a jaded supply chain professional, right? So, I mean, forecast accuracy is always going to be, on the list. 20 years from now, we'll still be complaining about forecast accuracy. One of the things that we're trying to do is how do we get more information upstream from our customers, and be able to understand, what are we doing, from a deal perspective, what's in the works, and then be able to do, what Frank was saying is translate that into the inbounds, and how do we position our components, understanding that, forecast accuracy is going to be a challenge. We're going to have demand, coming in. Let's take action sooner and make a decision as an organization to start reacting, before those orders hit. So we're trying to shift further upstream and understand that, so we understand the risks, and then we can take those actions.
Okay, that's interesting. So if I understand you well, it's about getting more visibility into the pipeline that is there. What are the likelihood of certain orders coming in, and at which configuration do you think they will come, and then translating that quickly into supply in order to make meaningful decisions on the supply chain side of things.
Yep, exactly. I mean, the challenge that you have is, you obviously want to service your business, but you also have inventory objectives, right? You got to keep an eye on your cash flow. And so you are going to be caught in those situations where you're going to, perhaps have to, chase and understanding, where those opportunities are as soon as possible is key, right? And being able to act, get the orders in place, and be able to service your business.
Okay. As supply chains are becoming increasingly interconnected, what is required from your next generation planning technologies to help proactively respond to disruptions? Maybe Freek, what is your take on this? So how can companies gain better end-to-end visibility into their supply chain, and how can you and are current scenario planning processes adequate to anticipate potential disruptions?
I think you made the remark earlier, Brian. It's really about risk management. Are you anyhow able to decipher, let's say, which big disruptions do I foresee? I think in 80% of the cases, if it's a big disruption, we didn't see it coming. And in hindsight, you have several people telling you, no, I saw the war in the Ukraine coming. No, I saw a big pandemic coming. But those are the best Nostradamus people. They do prediction in hindsight, and I'm also really good at that one. I would have been a millionaire by predicting in hindsight and buying stock at the stock exchange. So the things that I think we should really start understanding the difference between some sort of disruptions that happen without knowing. So they are there. And then, as we've seen with COVID, I think the best tool you could have was your phone. Just start calling around. Where are my components? Where are my supplies? What we also found there, we did quite some research then, that only 11.5% of the companies had actually insight in where do my goods come from, where my components come from. So that helps already, having that insight when a real major disaster happens. So I think the planning system will help you in having insights or your digital brain in where are my components coming from. That makes the phone call much easier when a real disaster happens, because you know who to call for that component. Then on a bit of a shorter horizon, because we still have also disruptions like the Suez Canal. Then I think strong software helps in seeing what's on the ship, which is laying there before the Suez Canal. Can I expedite other stuff from? So I think we also have to start thinking in a more differentiated way when we talk about scenarios, like long-term scenarios or risks, which you take into consideration, potential risks versus some sort of short-term disruption in my supply chain. And I think systems help dramatically over there. to create a transparency. But then again, you should be able to respond. Like I think Brian, you said it. Yeah, we can think about having flexibility in the semiconductor factory. Yeah, keep on dreaming. So it's the capacity is there. So if you talk about scenario planning, yeah, then it might be paying a risk insurance by doing extra inventory or creating extra capacity somewhere. So yeah. it's not a one size question or answer where you say scenario planning is always like this. It's really depending on, let's say, the situation you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. When we and Frank, I would like to get your view on this. So when we talk to clients, and Frank, you mentioned like the shift is going to inbound. We see that a lot of our clients are asking us how we can help them in terms of joint supplier business planning. So making key suppliers part of the integrated business planning process. And indeed, right? So on long term, what are the capacities out there? What are the forecasts? But also in short term, how can you collaborate, right? So how do you see from your experience, how are companies trying to tackle those challenges at the moment? And how do you see digitization as a way forward to differentiate and better handle joint supplier planning?
Yeah, look, and I'll move a little bit into the end-to-end view, because in the end, the supplier collaboration element is there to serve a purpose, and the purpose is still in the end the right business outcome. So we do see 4 key things that are happening. I think the first one is granularity of the data you can actually work with, and Freek mentioned earlier on that the phone was really important during COVID. There were some exceptions on companies that did have, the detailed information on inbound shipment flows, on order levels, on part inventories, etc. And I think those are the ones that actually thrived. So having sort of a granularity of data across the end-to-end value chain, I think that has to be the starting point. I think the second element is indeed the collaboration model itself. So it's with suppliers, it's with your third-party manufacturers, third-party packaging companies you work with. It's with some of your key customers that you have in the extended chain. And you want to have, in the end, the ability to oversee the flows, the transactions that are happening, because that will allow you to act. As those are the first 2 elements, which for me are quite foundational. Then the third element becomes the actual optimization equation has changed. Right? 3-4 years ago, we were talking about we're really happy if we can balance cost and service. The reality today is it's cost, service, it's risk or resilience, and it's also ESG, right? So how do we in the end work with a platform where you can optimize against all those different dimensions and then make informed decisions? And again, I think there has been quite a bit of movement in the last sort of 12 months on how you can really make that happen. And then the last element, I think, where you can see some of the leaders jumping out compared to some of the others is in the short term, and I think Freek also mentioned this, in the short term, what is your ability to shape? So, we always like to talk about sensing and let's be good at forecasting, etc. But the reality is, if I have a great insight on where my value chain stands at the moment, that gives me a perfect opportunity to shape demand. So combining my typical forecast with net revenue management, with working with pricing elasticity to shape in the end the impact I can make. Those are the type of things that I think leaders do at this moment, which of course requires technology to help you get there.
Yeah, I fully recognize myself on those 4 items. I see Freek, I see you nodding. I think Brian as well. Any reflections from your side on?
I like the last point made by Frank. I like them all, but the last point stands out because we from supply chain, when you look to forecast accuracy, for example, I think you also mentioned it, Brian, it will be there forever. So we started off with this with Notre Dame's. We have I think a wrong perspective on forecast accuracy. We always think the forecast is wrong, but I think we came to the conclusion much more that the actuals are wrong. So a lot of work goes into your demand sensing, demand shaping. Can I get an understanding of the demand signal and go get my sales guy to go there? We work for a client where we start predicting, let's say, the order intake for the next 13 weeks. So when do we expect HP to put an order in my system? And if that order doesn't come, we just go to the sales guy and say, you should go and talk to the HP guy because the order was not there and predicted it. So in the quarter, our forecast accuracy really went up from around 50% to around 90%, just because we talked to the sales guy, hey, you should go there because I think HP has forgotten to put in an order. Or HP did put in the product code instead of the quantity. Pre-rep, you should start talking because 1 million from an order is, let's say, not. So I think this notion of the actual is wrong and that the forecast is wrong. That's building on what Frank says on this sensing and shaping. There you really need really strong analytical capabilities, insights into what's in the supply chain. People that can run the machine. So fully with that one.
Yeah. I agree. I fully agree with you here, Freek. And Brian, I want to pivot to one of the last topics I wanted to touch upon, right? So when you think about all of this, right? So we talk about end-to-end. In the example that Freek and Frank just gave around shaping, it's actually, going from, the forecast, demand accuracy and forecast accuracy to actually, hey, can we shape the demand with our clients? So it's going across boundaries and silos in the company, right? And that actually requires that supply chain planning is thought of as a holistic end-to-end function, right? But it also requires that companies think about integrated business planning as such, right? So it goes from procurement to production to logistics to sales, etc., to finance, but everybody's involved in that process, right? So you cannot do demand shaping if sales is not on board, and you cannot do anything if you don't understand kind of the inbound side of things, right? So you need to bring it all together, and that probably requires supply chain planning and integrated business planning to be a board level priority, to have sponsorship across all of these functions. Now, Brian, from your perspective, you're sitting in the business, you're going through transformations when it comes to planning. What is your experience when it comes to educating your key executive stakeholders on the value of planning and how to break through those silos in practice? Any learnings or findings that you have in that journey as you're going through that, Brian?
I think over the past couple of years, we've been on the hot seat, right, because of all the shortage situations that have taken place with the chips. So there's been plenty of conversations with sales, and we've taken that opportunity to educate them on the need for more information. You're talking to the customers, how do we take this information, extract it, and try to settle on a configuration that we can move forward with and start taking action. So lots of dialogue is definitely taking place on how do we improve that relationship. And one of the things that goes hand in hand with that is, and when you're in a configured order business, is how do you, narrow the scope, right? How do you shape demand? How do you, if you do have a shortage situation, how can you steer, the customer to something that, provides them what they need? It may not be exactly what they ordered, but something that meets the needs of the business. So it's been a little bit of give and take. I think customers have gotten a little bit more flexible than maybe they were previously in terms of what they want. Previously they would order what they want, that's it. But I think everyone kind of understood that there needs to be as long as we can provide a solution that meets the overall compute and storage needs, then let's try to move forward with something that we can offer and get a win for everyone.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? So especially in a configure to order business, you have the ability to offer alternative configurations for which you do have the materials in order to fulfill the outcome that the client is looking for, right? So thanks for sharing that. And what I hear you say, it's a lot about education, right? And it will be an interesting journey. Any last reflection from anyone on the call?
Yeah, so you could maybe just one statement on the comment on sort of how relevant is sort of planning for board level. I think what we see happening quite a bit is the differentiation between the R and the A. So responsibility for building the state-of-the-art planning capability very much, I think, still sits in supply chain, but it's moving cross-functional. But the overall accountability, I think, is something that moves either to the CEO or the CFO of an organization. And then you get into the right decision-making and the right authority levels.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. That's an exciting period that we're all in this space, right? So I wanted to thank you all for the lively discussion. I think for me it was insightful, and see you next time. Thanks.
I appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Koen. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Frank.
Meeting you all. See you.